Hi there, my name is Laurie Grenya and I'm the president and owner of HR Answers. Thanks for taking the time today to learn a little more about Oregon's Equal Pay Act. Oregon revised its equal pay law in House Bill 2005 during the 2017 legislative session. This affects ORS 652-220 and other related laws. There are two important dates leading up to the primary implementation. The first one was October 6th of 2017. At this date, employers within the state were prohibited from seeking any pay history with regards to an applicant or an employee. Later, the rules clarified the fact that an employee's salary information would already been known, so when seeking a promotion, transfer, or demotion within an organization, they were not prohibited from that information. But associated with pay history, this meant most organizations chose to remove from their application materials or any of their job screening materials any information about an applicant's prior pay. It was also clarified in the rules that employers could ask what an applicant's expectations were for pay, and that could certainly be used in conjunction with understanding how they were paying others doing comparable work. We'll talk more about comparable work in a bit. So then moving forward, on January 1st of 2019, just 3 short months after the rules were finalized in November of the previous year, the heart of the law went into play. For all Oregon employers, this meant doing some pretty significant evaluation of each job within the organization, as well as how they were paying each person in the organization as it related to that job comparison. All of that work was done in an effort to meet two factors. Number one, non-discrimination based on any type of protected class, which means any person, against or in consideration of work of comparison. The basic idea here being, if the same work is being done by two individuals in your organization as it relates to the knowledge, skill, effort, responsibility, and working conditions required for the job, then the pay should be the same unless bona fide factors are at play, and we'll talk about those as well. However, this particular law was not just about wages, it's about total compensation. So not only were we evaluating the base pay that an individual was receiving, we are also looking at all of those other benefits, including things like health insurance benefits, paid time off, sick leave provisions, and so on. Basically anything that has a monetary value to the employee. So on October 6th, we stopped asking about pay history, and on January 1st, most organizations had gone through some amount of work to evaluate jobs of comparable character and evaluate how they were paying in total compensation each employee within a comparable group. We'll deep dive into this in a few slides. So I talked about those bona fide factors. Those are the differences that the legislature said could exist between employees doing comparable work. So if your organization happens to have policies around a seniority system, a merit-based system, a system that measures earnings by quantity or quality, workplace location, travel if necessary and regular for the job, or education, training, and experience, those are okay. However, you have to have a policy that says that. We find most organizations use a combination of a few of these. The most popular are a seniority-based system or a merit-based system, and merit's just government speak for performance-based pay, as well as do we find most employers use education, training, and experience. Those three topics are typically used in two different ways. First, during recruitment. When an applicant comes to an organization with better than minimum qualifications in their background, it's not uncommon for that organization to pay more to that employee. There's nothing wrong with that unless you don't have a policy. You must have a policy in place that says how you're going to evaluate your education, training, and experience and maintain equity in placing individuals at different pay rates when doing the same job. Seniority-based systems are fairly self-explanatory, meaning if you're here another year, some kind of increase is given to individuals. If indeed that happens and you have a policy, that falls within the requirements of the law. Merit-based system can be a little more complex, especially if you're a larger organization, as a merit-based system would require supervisors who are evaluating the same comparable work to be evaluated the same way, meaning those supervisors will need to normalize their evaluation process with each other. That can be somewhat challenging, especially if those merit increases are provided or those performance evaluations are done on a basis of differences associated with certain anniversary dates and not all done at the same point in time. Oregon administrative rules were worked on throughout the period of time between the passage of the law in 2017 and its implementation in 2019. As this was such a significant piece of legislation impacting every employer that has at least 2 jobs, the responsibility for the administrative rules was significant. The administrative rules and the oversight of this particular law are handled by the Bureau of Labor and Industries in Oregon. During that same 2017 legislative session, there were a number of different rules that needed to be put in place under the responsibility of BOLI, or the Bureau of Labor and Industries. Those rules were written in a timeline that aligned with the implementation of the different pieces of legislation. This particular piece was the last one implemented, so these were the last set of rules that were completed. As such, a whole lot of information was supplied to organizations several months prior to implementation, ultimately resulting in a pretty short runway for organizations to reach compliance by January 1st of 2019. The administrative rules have a number of different components. We'll cover those on the next slide. The administrative rules broken down cover several segments: definitions, what specifically can and cannot be done around seeking and screening job applicants based on compensation, what does work of comparable character mean, what are the bona fide factors that can be considered legally and result in different pay or total compensation within a group of comparable character. The rules also define what are considered benefits as a part of total compensation. This addresses whether reduction in employee compensation is allowed, and a little spoiler alert, it is not if related with pay equity. The notice and posting requirements associated with the law, and then how are violations actually determined. In the downloaded version of this presentation, each of these number sets shown here in the rules are hyperlinks that will take you directly to the rule if you'd like to read further. So doing a little bit of additional information with regards to these rules, seeking and screening job applicants first, and as I mentioned, that was that early October implementation date. Salary history cannot be asked of any applicant. Also, applicants cannot be screened by wage history. So if indeed somebody did supply it, even if you didn't ask for it, you are not allowed to use that to determine whether an application would move forward in your evaluation processes. Salary history can be asked for once a contingent offer has been made, including the total compensation package. Now, at that point in time, I'm not sure what the value is of asking for salary history, but you are allowed to do it. You may ask an applicant about their desired wage for the job. And if history is shared or received, please, please, please be clear with the applicant that that information will not be used in the decision making, and then please document that clear instruction for your recruitment files. Comparable character. The law states that all jobs need to be compared against knowledge, skill, effort, responsibility, and working conditions. And as you see on the slide, these are not defined. Rather, when reading the rule, you will see that some suggestions are made about what might be considered in the areas of knowledge, skill, effort, and responsibility. Working conditions does give a definition, and one still needs to choose amongst those, which will be used to evaluate each job in your organization. So I do want to stop here for just a couple moments and mention the fact that in the world of comparable characteristic, this is evaluating each job within your organization using the same criteria. So if you were to develop a definition of knowledge, you would have to apply that same definition with various levels. So essentially, if the definition of knowledge were the education required for the job at the time of hire, and the bottom of your scale is no education's required, then an associate's degree, then a bachelor's, then a master's, then a PhD, you would use that exact same definition and that exact same set of levels for every role in your organization. You would do the same for any definition you put to skill, effort, responsibility, and working conditions. However, each organization should be very careful not to evaluate the same thing twice. Exceptions to comparable pay, as we talked about before, had a few nuances added when the rules were completed, and you'll see those are identified here in bold. So with a seniority system, that is seniority within the organization. This essentially means you're not transitioning seniority from one organization to another. However, I will say that the way you account for seniority with another system or another organization as comparable to yours is in the experience factor. So it does need to be experience related to the job, but you can count the years of working with a like organization as experience, not as seniority. Speaking of other things that were in bold, experience related to the job, training related to the job, and education related to the job. Again, each individual organization will need to define what related to the job means. In all cases, it is the organization's responsibility to have policy, processes, and administrative systems in place to ensure consistency in the outcome of total compensation associated with jobs of comparable character. It has been frequently misunderstood that pay equity is about making sure that an organization is paying the same as other organizations. Essentially, that an organization is doing market analysis. That is not pay equity. Pay equity, again, is about the processes and procedures you have in place to administer pay or administer total compensation within your organization. Determining benefits. An employer may provide different benefits as part of compensation to employees performing work of comparable character if the benefits that are offered being the key word here, to all employees are comparable. Health insurance benefits are probably one of our best examples here. Most employers offer either a number of plans or one plan with multiple tiers. Each employee has the ability to choose which tier they may take. They choose to not take insurance. They choose the employee-only coverage. They choose employee and family, or employee and spouse, or employee and something else. Whatever it is that you're offering. As long as the offer is consistent to all employees performing comparable work, then you have met your obligation under pay equity. Each employee gets to choose. Your offer has to give them all the same choices. Reductions in compensation. As I mentioned before, you are not allowed to reduce compensation levels of an employee to comply with the provisions of the law. Essentially, red circling, freezing, or otherwise holding an employee's compensation constant until others can come into alignment is allowed. You want to be really careful about this. As an example, if we hired 5 receptionists on the same day, and those receptionists were all doing the exact same thing, answering the same phone lines, dispersing them to the appropriate departments, greeting people who were coming in, scheduling meetings, maybe prepping conference rooms, so on and so forth. Those 5 receptionists all got hired on the exact same day, and they are all offered the same benefits. And we're doing our pay equity evaluation, and we find that one of those receptionists is making $500 a month more than anyone else. From a benefits perspective, everything's the same. If that one person is making $500 more every month and we're unable to determine based on a bona fide factor evidenced by your policies that there was a reason for that additional $500 a month, then the other 4 receptionists would need to be brought up in pay by $500 a month, and we would owe those other 4 receptionists an additional $500 a month going back for up to 2 years or when the difference occurred. In other words, you can't reduce pay, you must increase that of others. So the required posting and notices. Employers have to display the poster in every establishment where employees work. Now don't forget that as we've all embraced the remote workforce, or we have accepted it because there's no other alternative to getting employees, you do need to make sure that even your remote workers have access to all of the employment posters, not just the pay equity poster. You can distribute a written notice to each employee personally by regular mail or email, or you can include it in a paycheck. You can incorporate written notices into a handbook or manual made available to every employee, whether it be print or electronic, and you can certainly post the poster in a conspicuous and accessible location for each workplace. So violations. An employer actually commits an unlawful compensation practice each time an employee is remunerated in violation with ORS 652-220. Easily put, every time you issue payroll, the violation is occurring. Now, I mentioned earlier that the Bureau of Labor and Industry is the entity that's responsible for oversight of this particular law. Their goal has always been education first. So as long as you're doing your best and you're trying to accomplish this work, it's unlikely that you would see a sanction based on a first violation. However, you will be asked to do the work and correct any inequities. And again, those violations occur every time payroll is issued. It's important that you stay on top of this. So, steps to success. There are several, and this comes from our experience in working with over 500 companies to the successful completion of their pay equity work. The first step is defining your comparable characteristics: knowledge, skill, effort, responsibility, and working conditions. How will you define these, and how will you measure each of them? Then you'll need to update your job descriptions. And this is not necessarily because your organization hasn't done a good job of this, but it's because the information you need to assess in comparable characteristics may be different than what you had captured in job descriptions previously. So it's probably an update to that form. And if it has the happy circumstance of bringing you up to date on the work actually being done, you've killed 2 birds with 1 stone. So that gets me to the second one here. Are your job descriptions an accurate reflection of the actual work? This is important because the pay equity law does say it doesn't matter what you call a job or actually what you've written down. It matters what's actually being done. Now, we do believe that job documentation is a requirement, but the process behind that is keeping it up to date on a regular basis. So what's actually written is what's actually done. Our recommendation is that if you need to gather information from employees, you use a job analysis questionnaire. This is available in our job description resource guide on our website. There are 3 steps to an input and review process associated with job descriptions and job description updates. The first is employee input. The second, supervisory review and input. And the third is HR review for organization-wide evaluation. Step 3, analyze every job against the comparable characteristics defined in step 1. So analyze the job, be careful that you're not analyzing the person or their performance, be consistent in the interpretation of information, and as an example, if education qualification is 2 to 4 years, choose the same level of measurement every time you see 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years. We recommend the minimum be 2 years. And then track the information. For those of you who've worked with me before, you know I love a spreadsheet. And of course, in the toolkits available in the DIY component of our website, you can get to tools that were designed specifically for this. Step 4 is grouping the jobs of comparable character. This is actually quite simple if you're using our tool set, because as you've tracked that, you have then sortable groupings of jobs. The goal here is that the majority of your jobs will come out unique, and in our experience, that is true. Once you know what jobs are comparable, and or if there are multiple people doing any one job, it is important to gather the total compensation information. Just remember, that's not base wages. It's base wages, benefits, and fringe benefits. That could be shift differentials, overtime, bonuses, pay for performance, certification pay, severance, and anything else that results in pay now or later. Benefits can include insurances, holiday pay, paid time off, sick leave, vacation, education and training benefits, cell phone stipends, car allowances, gym memberships, moving allowances, or any other offering of monetary value. These lists are not all inclusive. You may have a very creative group in how you've chosen to pay your employees. There's nothing wrong with that. We just need to capture all of it. Also remember, as I mentioned at the beginning of this slide, you only need to gather this information when there are multiple people or multiple employees in a group of comparable character. If you only have one receptionist and no other job is compared to the receptionist, then no data is needed. However, if you have 5 of them, like in my example before, you would need to gather the total compensation and go through the steps of evaluation. Step 6, analyze the total compensation of every grouping of comparable character. In other words, those with the same job profile, meaning the same characteristic definitions, level assessments for each of those have lined up. This is typically a monthly assessment. However, at its most finite level, it should be every payroll. If the organization offers the exact same benefits to every employee, you only need to note on your spreadsheet that that's true rather than showing the data for each employee. I mean, I love data like the next person, but there's no need for redundancy. So as an example, and here's a good one of our 5 receptionists, total compensation. We have a job profile looking at 5 different areas. That's a number, essentially, of knowledge, effort, responsibility, skill, responsibility, and working conditions. In that, we have assigned a level value to each of those 5 characteristics, which is what you see in the far left column. Job title, we just put in job 2. We also gave it an employee ID so that we'd know what it looked like. We pulled in the monthly wage. You'll also see that we're footnoting insurance because it's the same. And the only other benefit we're looking at is PTO. In this evaluation, we've highlighted the differences. In monthly wage, we have employee ID 13 and 19 making $3,000 a month, and we have employee number 22 with 10 hours of PTO rather than 8. We need to justify those differences. So now we will go through and justify only those things that were highlighted. So we're using a seniority-based system in this example. So you'll see we've added seniority to the far right column. You'll also see some notes at the bottom of this slide that identify that the organization provides a seniority adjustment every 18 months following a 6-month probationary period. So in other words, we would expect to see an increase for anyone who'd been with the organization for 2 or more years. We also see that the organization provides an additional 2 hours of PTO per month for every 3 years the person is with the organization. So when looking down our list of employees, we're trying to find out if employee ID number 13 should be making $3,000 a month, and indeed that person has been with the organization for more than 2.5 years, so it appears that aligns with the policy. So does employee ID number 19 have more than 2 years and appears to align with the policy? Employee 22, we have highlighted their monthly PTO at 10 hours. They have more than 3 years. That seems to align with policy. However, I also notice that in the monthly wage column, they're still making $2,500 a month. It appears under policy that that role should be making $3,000 a month, consistent with the other 2 employees who have more than 2 years of seniority and are making $3,000 a month. So then we look at step 8, which is developing our corrective action plan if indeed it's needed. So we've already identified the corrective action here is actually for employee ID number 22. Their $2,500 a month needs to be increased to $3,000 a month, and you would need to look at back pay or lost wages for this employee as well. Now that back pay and lost wages is a 2-year look back, or as far back as the inequity existed, not exceeding 2 years. So just to recap those steps, first, you're going to define your comparable characteristics. Second, you're going to update job descriptions to ensure you've captured everything you need to measure, as well as updating to what's actually being done. Step 3, you're going to analyze every job using your comparable characteristic definitions. You're going to group comparable jobs together. You're going to gather all the needed total compensation information for any group with multiple employees. Then you're going to analyze the total compensation for the employees in those comparable groups. You're going to justify the differences. And when you're unable to justify based on the bona fide factors, you'll develop a corrective action plan. So, project timelines for these processes are not quick. They're 6 to 12 months depending on the size of the organization and amount of resources that you can assign. We've given you a basic outline of the amount of time that it usually takes for each of the 8 steps. Please recognize that updating those job descriptions is one of the most significant timelines you'll see. It requires interaction at a number of levels, and as you all know, vacations, busy work schedules can make differences in anyone's priority. So just make sure to consider things that are coming up in your organization or reach out for assistance. So pay administration, in most of the pay equity work that we've accomplished, we find that organizations need to update their handbook. They choose to look at their pay practice evaluation and remodel it if needed. In some cases, they need to develop tools for assessment of current employees' compensation to determine offers and negotiations for new hires, resulting in consistency. They need policies for reassignment of work, training or development, or coverage during absenteeism. They need policies for transfer, demotion, and promotion, aligning with pay equity and new hires. And don't forget, in Oregon, you're going to repeat this evaluation at least every 3 years, if not prior to changes being made in the work being done. Thanks so much for taking time to listen to our presentation and overview on Oregon's pay equity. If you'd like to reach out to us for additional information, feel free to call us at 503-885-9815. Additional information is also on our website at www.hranswers.com, or you can always email us at info@hranswers.com. Thanks, and have a great day.